In Pokemon Go, gym defense does not matter quite as much as it used to, and using a golden raspberry could defend a gym better than any single Pokemon could. But at the end of the day, people want to know what the best Pokemon are on defense, and it's part of my due diligence to inform you guys who the best gym defenders are. So up ahead is a clip from my live stream SwagTips where I cover just that. So gym defense tier list update, probably be updated within the week. I just got all the information set to the big bosses there to update the page. So this is kind of like the preliminary, like the rankings that you will be seeing on GamePress. So you can think about this as like a sneak peek to that information. Oh man, like the inside scoop, because I'm the one updating it, right? And when this video makes it on YouTube, probably will be updated, and I'll have like a link in the description and then have the little card thing pop up, and everyone will be set. So this tier list was made, well, development on the Defender tier list here started after the stat rebalance in fall, and the stat rebalance that actually like stuck. Because when it first happened and then they took it away, I wasn't sure if they were going to alter it when they brought the stat rebalance back in. And if they altered it, well, then that could change things enough to kind of make me slightly upset about them doing it that way. And I didn't know when they were going to bring it back. It was just a whole mess that they decided to, push that off a little bit. And then this was also made before the PvP teaser. Made but not finalized, and then PvP came out, and then that caused another time delay because we were all hyped about PvP. But yes, this was made before the PvP teaser. As far as PvP goes and the multi-charge moves that are coming in the future, I don't feel like that will really change these rankings much. A lot of Pokemon that have an unfavorable matchup against another one, well, having a coverage move isn't really going to help them that much. And even if it does help them a bit, you're probably still going to want to switch into a more optimal attacker to take them on. And then on the defender side of the force, we don't know how gym defenders will use a second charge move, if they will at all even. Will it function on like a gambit system, like, hey, if this move is effective, then we're going to favor that one? Or are we just going to use whatever you use right away and it's just going to be a dice roll? I don't know how that's going to go, but ultimately, overall, at the end of the day, I don't think having two charge moves instead of one really upsets this ranking. The only thing that really could throw off the rankings in a really big way is if they overhauled the charge move system and make it like what PvP looks like. The energy requirements for PvP attacks is based off of how much damage they do, and then animation time is completely taken out of the equation. So if they do something like that, then that could dramatically change what defenders are good. Right now we don't think that they will, but we'll have to see what ends up happening, right? So just to let you know on that. Another thing I want to throw in is gym defense in Pokemon Go doesn't really matter. I already know that. Everybody already knows that. Throw a Blissey in a gym if you really want to stick it to someone, and then stick to your golden Razzes, and that's the only way you're really going to defend a gym. At the end of the day, no matter what you put in the gym, if somebody wants to take the gym down, they probably will. The whole goal with gym defense and using optimal gym defenders for the most part is to deter attack, because then people will look at a gym and they'll go, oh man, that gym's got all the good stuff in it. I'm going to go fight the gym down the street that doesn't. So then the gym's defended because somebody didn't attack it who would have otherwise. So using good gym defenders doesn't perfectly stop people from attacking you. So just be mindful of that. Overall, when putting Pokemon in a gym, try to be mindful of the Pokemon that come before the Pokemon you put in, and try to like make them have some synergy with their defenses. For example, Dragonite here is weak to ice type attacks, so you might want to follow up Dragonite with like a Metagross or a Milotic, which resist the ice type attacks. Make people think a little bit more when they're attacking the gym, and if they have to think more, then they might just think about fighting the gym up the road or close to their house on their way home from work or something like that. That's the most we can aspire for gym defense. And then before I go into talking about the gym defenders themselves, we got to talk about the methodology here a little bit. Let you guys know how we got to this point, right? So what I did is I took a whole bunch of gym defenders. I ended up taking like 50 or 60 of them, and I rated them against the 5 best attackers. Now, who are the 5 best attackers? Well, they're right here. Yeah, the 5 best attackers, which are Machamp, Metagross with the Meteor Mash, Shadow Ball Mewtwo, Raikou, and Rayquaza. Now, of course, Machamp can represent just about any fighting type Pokemon. Mewtwo, I guess, could be a placeholder for a Double Dark Tyranitar or a Gengar. Raikou can cover Zapdos, Luxray, and Electivire, if any of those are your personal flavor. Maybe you like to use Jolteon electric type. Raikou is arguably the best of them all. And then we got Rayquaza, which covers the dragon type attackers. You might feel that Latios is a better gym attacker because it's got Dragon Claw and it's got arguably better resistances. But at the end of the day, the difference between Rayquaza and the other dragons isn't that big, especially with how we were doing the model. So yeah, Rayquaza, biggest attack, hits things down the fastest. So we took these attackers and I simulated them in Go Battle Sim up against level 40 defenders and defenders with a 2000 CP ceiling. So if they are higher than 2000 CP, well then they're brought down to 2000 CP. If they're lower, well then they go to whatever their cap is. The reason why I did that is because 2000 is a really good spot for motivation over time, like motivation decay. If you're not familiar with motivation decay, then I suggest checking out the meta-analysis of gym defense on GamePress. It's on one of their sidebarred things right by where the gym defense tier list is, so you can get to that really quickly. Get learned up on how fast Pokemon demotivate over time, right? So 2000 is kind of significant because it also optimizes well with gym height over time, so how long a gym stays tall. All those strategies are covered in that article and expanded on more, and I'm not gonna eat up our time here describing everything to detail. So then I did all those simulations, and I also did them with dodging charge moves and not dodging charge moves to get an idea of what they look like when the attacker is being lazy and what they look like when the attacker is being super meticulous about it. And then I rated all those together, and that got us like a nice quantitative ranking of all the gym defenders. Then from there, I decided to do a like a swap discount, if that makes sense. Basically, if Machamp is fighting Togekiss, well, Machamp's gonna do super crazy, ugly bad against Togekiss, because Togekiss double resists Machamp and KOs Machamp like it's nothing. So you wouldn't want to use Machamp there. You'd probably switch out to Metagross or Raikou. So what I did then is I took the performance of Metagross and then I replaced Machamp's performance with Metagross's performance, made sure to highlight it to remind myself that the switch took place there, and then I add an extra 5 seconds to that time to kind of give it a little bit of a tax, because obviously if you're using the most optimal attacker all the time, well, that's not very fair, I guess, to defenders, right? You gotta be like, well, there's still some weight because you had to switch out, right? And I decided to make that 5 seconds. And because Machamp and Metagross are seen as the two best gym attackers for the meta right now, if you were able to defend well against both of them, well, then I gave a 10-second tax to whatever got switched in. You got the slow dudes, water, psychic type. These two guys don't handle them well. Raikou does, but because these two are the best, they got a 10-second time bonus because they made Raikou bring in, which is like not the two best, most ugliest attackers. So that's how the quantitative side of the model went. And then from there, we have the qualitative side, which is me and the GamePress team kind of nitpicking over the rankings, trying to sort them out based off of what we actually experience in real life. I mean, the computer can say one thing and quantitative rankings from a simulation can say one thing, but then there's actually what we experience, what motivates the hearts of people, and how things perform in very specific ways. One big thing is some defenders are really good, but they're not so hot against Machamp at all. They're weak to Machamp, and when they're up against Machamp, they're just getting wailed on, and they're like of the worst, arguably, defenders in the game. And because Machamp's like super ubiquitous, well, obviously that should hurt their rankings a lot. So then that would, hurt them. Then there's like defense synergy, what does well against the meta, stuff like that, what follows other Pokemon well. So that influences them. Ultimately, we couldn't agree super well on a lot of these different topics, but what we were able to settle on was a couple qualities that defined the defenders in a way. And that is how practical they are, if they're good but really weak against Machamp, and if they are anti-meta. Basically, the elite Pokemon on this tier list here are Pokemon that are really good, like objectively really powerful defenders at max CP. Objectively in the rankings, if you spell it out, if you move things up and down one way or another, these three constantly end up being on top. Then we got the most practical defenders, which are ones that function really well in the meta and are probably the defenders that you do want to use on gym defense because they work really well. And a lot of them are pretty low investment to use well because using them at that 2000 CP range is kind of optimal for a lot of reasons. And if you are using them at 2000 CP, maybe you don't have to power them up. Then we got the good but LOL Machamp, which are Pokemon that perform really well on gym defense, but have a significantly disadvantageous matchup against Machamp. Oftentimes these Pokemon are also pretty poor against Metagross 2, which is like two big old nails in the coffin against them existing. And then we have the anti-meta Pokemon, which are Pokemon that perform really well against several specific attackers, but against other matchups, they're pretty bad, or relatively bad, or bad enough to be like, yeah, I probably don't want to use that. So that's how we ended up sorting them out in the end, and I'd say for the most part, we have all come into agreement that this is a good way to do it. Oh yeah, you'll also notice that this is just a general tier list ranking. It's not specific like the specific defender tier lists are. We may update the specific defender tier lists in time. The next 2 weeks are going to be pretty crazy for me in particular because of exams. I have just a big life-altering exam on Monday, and then the following Monday, I have my final, which is a cumulative final, which is like do or die, do you want to live kind of final. And then we also have PvP updates, and we have a winter event coming in, and you know, the raids are going to change soon. So there's a lot of stuff that might get in the way of the specific defender tier lists. But if you are familiar with the strategies involved with the specific defender tier lists, I think you can kind of piece out where a lot of these Pokemon are going to fall in it. And a lot of these picks are more or less the same as they've ever been for gym defense, so not a lot has changed there. If you're curious about specific defender tier lists, coming soon, if we got time for it, depending on what happens with Pokemon Go. Alright, so that's all the boring stuff. Let's start talking about the defenders here. So we got tier 1, and that's Blissey. And yeah, Blissey is still the best defender in Pokemon Go. I mean, no surprises there, right? Even with the nerf, even with Metagross existing, Blissey is still just number 1 by a lot. Now, one thing I will say about Blissey is that Pokemon that defend specifically against Pokemon, like let's say Empoleon here versus Metagross, well, Empoleon's going to be better against specifically Metagross than Blissey is. So that's something to keep in mind. But overall, in general rankings and neutral matchups, and even against some favorable matchups, Blissey still comes out on top. So there's just no arguing against Blissey being number 1. If you're going to defend a gym, if you're going to invest in a gym defender, Blissey is the Pokemon that you'd want to do for that. And then we got the Elite Defenders. And the Elite Defenders are really good defenders. And there is a bit of contention between the Elite and Practical Defenders because while the Elite perform better at max CP and they've got really good stats and they got really good general performance, the Practical ones might be slightly more practical for people to use. At the end of the day, we decided to put the Elite over the Practical because the Elites are Elite, right? So really big stats. Starting out, we got Dragonite in the Elite. No surprises there if you're familiar with the SwagTips and how I feel about Dragonite. A lot of people feel Dragonite's bad because it's got the doubled up weakness to Ice, and then it's also weak to Dragon itself. And my impression on the Ice weakness is that Ice Pokemon, to this day, even with Weavile in the game, are really bad against just about anything else. Even Mamoswine is probably going to be bad against most of the other defenders featured here. I mean, you got Water and Steel type. Those are two big types because Metagross exists, and they also resist Ice really well. Yeah, so bringing an Ice type attacker to a gym just basically means you're only bringing 5 attackers to the gym, and an Ice type that you're only using for this one specific Pokemon, right? I think that's pretty good. That's in Dragonite's favor. And as far as it being weak to other Dragon type Pokemon, there is the chance that you get animation locked into your charge move and then Dragonite takes you out with its charge move. And we've all been there. It's happened to me several times. Talking to players in my area, it's happened to them. Talking to the GamePress team, which are the elite attackers ever, right? Yeah. And it happens to them. So Dragonite, pretty potent force there. But ultimately, if you don't like it because of the double weakness to Ice, well, it's your choice to not put in a gym, and that's perfectly fine. Probably doesn't matter at the end of the day, right? It's gym defense. So moving along here, we got Milotic, and I think Milotic is a defender that a lot of people can agree with as being a really good defender. In our last defender tier list, the general one, we actually put Milotic on the level of Snorlax, and now that Snorlax has been nerfed so heavily, Milotic is just definitely better than Snorlax, of course. So yeah, no surprises here if you've been keeping up with Gym Defense and GamePress and myself, that Milotic is once again one of the most elite defenders. It's got Waterfall and Surf, which is excellent for a water type Pokemon. It's got Dragon Tail, so any dragon types coming in to ruin its day are going to get punished by that. And if a grass type attacker, for whatever reason, decides to front on Milotic, it also carries Blizzard, which could punish it. Blizzard also hurts the dragon type Pokemon. So yeah, Milotic, really good for that. Main problem with Milotic is that its resistances aren't that potent, it doesn't really throw off a lot of attackers. In fact, it only really throws off Metagross because of the steel type attacks. So somebody that's just mindlessly tapping at their screen, going through a gym, probably won't pay much of a mind to Milotic, which works against it. And on top of that too, if the moveset becomes figured out, if somebody does start attacking the gym, well then they'll know what they can safely throw at the Milotic. But if somebody is already attacking the gym, well then they're attacking the gym. And if somebody's attacking the gym, then the gym's probably going to go down anyways, regardless of what's in it. So there's also that to consider too. Then we've got Metagross. Yeah, before Metagross was really good, but the one thing holding it back was that it didn't have a multi-bar charge move. Now it does. It's one of the best multi-bar charge moves in the game. Meteor Mash. So yeah, Steel-type Pokemon come with a lot of resistances, but the one fatal flaw to Steel-type Pokemon on Gym Defense is that they're weak to Machamp. Well, Metagross is Steel Psychic, and Psychic type resists fighting, so it cancels out the weakness. Now it's just neutral to Machamp like Milotic is, but it still maintains all those lovely Steel type resistances. So yeah, and then it also has Zen Headbutt, so even though it's neutral, if Machamp tries to front on it, it's going to be getting hit by super effective damage. That, coupled with the all-powerful Meteor Mash, should be enough to take out a Machamp that's not being too mindful about fighting the gym, unless it's like cloudy outside or something. So these three Pokemon make up the elite, really good defenders. You don't have to use Stardust to power them up specifically to use them on defense. That's, not the best use of your Stardust. You should probably be saving it for the PvP system that's coming out. But if you do have these guys powered up and you do want to put them in a gym, well, they will be doing the best, especially on a short-term basis. Then next we have Tier 2.5, right? So this is Tier 2, the elites, and then Tier 2.5, which are the most practical Pokemon for Gym Defense. It's a practical tier. But yeah, so these Pokemon I feel are arguably better than the elite. Like in my heart, I rank a lot of them better than the elite, but the elite are the elite. So here we've got the slow dudes, we got Steelix, we got Gyarados, we got Executor, not the Alolan form, regular Executor, and we got the Hypno. I'm just gonna lump the Confusion boys here, so the slow dudes, Executor and Hypno together. And the one thing that binds these four Pokemon together is Confusion Access. The fast move Confusion is one of the most powerful fast moves in all of Pokemon Go for Gym Defense. So it's really good for them that they have that. So that means that when a Machamp's attacking a gym, not only do these guys resist Machamp, but they're hitting it with that heavy Confusion attack, which means you basically have to switch that Machamp out or you're going to be having a bad time. In the case of the slow dudes, they're also water type, so then they throw off the Metagross. Metagross can't hit through these guys too quickly either, which means you're going to have to opt for another attacker, a ghost, a dark, an electric type. If you use a grass type, usually they're grass poison, weak to Confusion. So yeah, really good guys there. The main thing that sets Executor apart from the rest of the squad is that rather than being weak or neutral to electric type damage, Executor resists electric type damage, which is another small claim to fame to Executor and is what allowed it to pull up on this list where before it was a little bit too low to rate. One problem with Executor is that its Confusion is a legacy move. So if you don't have Confusion on the Executor, you might want to pass it up for something else. And then you've got, Hypno here. And Hypno's great. It's got a wide variety of charge moves that it can use to complement it. It's got, Psyshock, which is multi-bar to the max. We got Shadow Ball, which could, mess with a Metagross or a Mewtwo trying to attack it. We got Focus Blast, which could lay the hurt onto Tyranitar. So overall, really good for those reasons. Like Executor, its main issue is that it has a lot of legacy moves that are really good. Shadow Ball is legacy, Psyshock is legacy. So Focus Blast, Psychic, Future Sight, those are all single bar charge moves. They're all great, but they're single bar charge moves, right? I guess you could say the slow dudes and Executor also kind of have like a similar issue with the whole single bar charge move side. Roping it back, I guess, being reliant on single bar charge moves isn't that big of a deal when your fast move is Confusion, so it all kind of balances out in a way. Just stuff to be mindful of when using these guys. Overall, I'd say the slow dudes rank extremely well though, because they throw off both Machamp and Metagross, which is excellent. Most of the time when I approach a gym and Blissey is already in it, so I don't throw my own Blissey, I often throw in a slow dude just because, it throws off people the most. So yeah, these two guys are definitely some favored defenders here for myself. So aside from the Confusion squad, we have Gyarados and we have Steelix. So Steelix needs no introduction. It's great at a variety of CP ranges, so it can function well for gym height, it can function well for defending over time. The main thing that works against it is that it is weak to Machamp. And you might be thinking, its Machamp weakness means that it should be good but LOL Machamp, but I feel like all the qualities that make Steelix good is enough to pull it above the good but LOL Machamp range and bring it into a practical defender sense. Because this guy resists a lot of things that are super effective against all the other Pokemon that are really good on gym defense. It resists electric in a big way, it resists steel, it resists dragon, so there isn't a whole lot that gets through Steelix aside from Machamp. Fire types also rain on it. So yeah, Steelix, really great defender to include on a gym defense. And if you do want to invest in defender, definitely do suggest investing in a Steelix because you can plop that on in. Usually it complements stuff really well that, you know, resists Machamp. You know, you got Blissey and then you got a Machamp resistor. What comes after that? Probably Steelix. Yeah, and then we've got Gyarados. And then Gyarados, controversial gym defender, sort of like Dragonite, because why? It's got that doubled up weakness to electric type damage. I fight with people all the time about Gyarados being a good defender. At the end of the day, I feel like Gyarados maybe should be rated a little bit higher, but it does have the doubled up weakness to electric, which can't be ignored. And in the quantitative model, if you switch out all the other attackers' performances for Raikou, and then you add like a 10% second tax to them using Raikou instead, Gyarados ends up being really, really poor. So you just can't ignore that as on a quantitative model. And then qualitatively, everybody knows that Gyarados is super weak to electric type damage, so that does work against Gyarados. Great thing about Gyarados is it has all these lovely resistances. It throws off Metagross, it throws off Machamp, it's got Crunch, so Metagross has to be a little wary, even Mewtwo has to be a bit wary of fighting this guy. If you bring in your Dragon-type Pokemon, it could have Dragon Tail, it could have Twister, it could have Outrage, it could have Dragon Pulse. So it has all this potential to just ruin your day. And yeah, so increased battle times if you're a neutral attacker too. Gyarados is just great for a lot of reasons. It's just the one thing that's holding it back is the electric type weakness. I don't think it's that big of a deal. Enough people feel like it is enough of a deal, so because of that, Gyarados isn't elite. It is a practical gym defender, and I guess some people would probably fight me to the death saying that it's not practical because of electric type Pokemon. That's fine. I mean, there's plenty of gym defenders to use here. Pick a different one. Good example I can give though of Gyarados' weakness not being that big of a deal is like you got the slow dudes here, which are seen as like the better Gyarados. And I would say the slow dudes are more practical to use than Gyarados is overall. Like it takes 4 extra seconds for a Raikou to beat them than it takes to beat Gyarados. So is it that big of a deal? Maybe. I love Gyarados as a gym defender. This is where it ends on compromise, right? So going down from the practical gym defenders here, we go to the good but LOL Machamp defenders. And yeah, these defenders are still really good gym defenders. If you take like a generalized gym defense ranking, depending on where you put all the different stuff for the telemetry, these defenders are on top. They are arguably of the elite for one reason or another. Big problem that they have is that Machamp just wails on them. They're not that good against Machamp. And then also Metagross, many of them aren't so hot against Metagross. So that's something that also works heavily against them. If we were to tier them out, I would say that these Pokemon should be lower than the elite defenders and the most practical defenders. You should consider these guys after them. If you're wondering what the big M is here, that's Mel Metal. These are using the Flork of Cow images that GamePress commissioned the Flork of Cows to make for them. And there isn't a Mel Metal one made yet, so I just put in a big M. So if you wonder what the big M is, that's Mel Metal. So yeah, as far as the qualities of these defenders go, you got Slacking. Slacking has the highest CP cap of Pokemon that you can put in gyms in the game, which is huge because it helps out gym height over time in a really big way. And how much does gym height matter? Well, if somebody's looking to fight a gym and there's gyms that aren't tall around, they're probably going to favor the pancake gyms before the tall gyms. It's just human psychology. We do it all the time. If you're looking for an easy target, well, pancake gyms suggest that that's going to be an easy target. So if you don't agree on that, well then Slacking probably isn't your cup of tea. You might want to look for a different gym defender. Another thing to keep in mind with Slacking is that its Play Rough can be pretty lethal on Machamp if it ends up hitting, but if it whiffs using the Play Roughs or if the Machamp dodges the Play Roughs, well then you kind of lose that offensive advantage there. Overall, Slacking's a really decent gym defender, but for these reasons, it's ultimately held back. Then we got Snorlax, and yeah, Snorlax definitely got slapped with the whole stat rebalance there. Now it's just not as hot as it used to be. So yeah, overall, Snorlax, Machamp brings it down quick. Metagross, Doesn't really care about its attacks. It is a great Pokemon for gym defense though. It's got that high CP cap, so it can help gym height. Body Slam can wail on attackers that don't resist it and could possibly take them out. So overall, a really good defender still. Definitely might want to consider throwing it into a gym if you have one powered up, but it's not as good as it once was. Then we got the big M here, Mel Metal. And Mel Metal is compared pretty closely to Snorlax. Yeah, it's like Snorlax in a lot of ways. Also different too, right? It's a steel type Pokemon, so it is weak to Machamp, but it does resist Metagross, which gives it a little bit more value than Snorlax. But it doesn't have that super oppressive body spam, so that kind of works against it. But at the same time, it does kind of have a little unique coverage between Rock Slide and Thunderbolt, which could punish certain would-be attackers. For example, somebody's bringing in a Charizard to fight the gym with Fire-type damage, which would definitely hurt Mel Metal, while Rock Slide and Thunderbolt could both do a lot to punish the Charizard. How often is a Charizard attacking a gym? I don't know. If there's a Mel Metal in the gym, how often is a Machamp bringing it down? Probably more often than a Fire-type Pokemon would. So ultimately, that holds Mel Metal back. Then we got Chauncey. And yeah, Chauncey, not a very threatening defender. It's not going to hurt somebody attacking it, but it does waste a lot of time. It also has the best performance with CP decay. So if you put it in a gym and that gym lasts for like 6+ hours, well then an attacker would probably have to attack the Chauncey 3 times before knocking it out. And then it's 3 times, along with it being the best time waster at that CP range. So Chauncey has a lot going for it in that respect, but with the nerf, it's no longer as annoying, and then it's also weak to Machamp, which brings it down to the oopsie, you're good, but Machamp exists tier of Pokemon. Then finally, we have the anti-meta Pokemon. And these guys perform well against specific attackers, but they don't do so hot against other attackers to such an extent where it's like, it's hard to say how good they are, right? Now, as far as like defensive synergy or making people switch with your defenders, like a lot of Pokemon do that well, and basically everything in the Elite and the Practical gym defenders, you know, the tier 2 and the tier 2.5 are considered for these reasons as well. It's just that these guys are a little bit more swingy and their defenses don't, I guess, necessarily synergize super crazy well. Some of them are weak to either Machamp or Metagross, and that also hurts them. So yeah, starting out we got Empoleon, really excellent defender against who but the Metagross. Also does well against Dragon type Pokemon because it's Water Steel type. So yeah, so if a Dragon type or a Steel type Pokemon like Metagross, we're almost exclusively thinking about Metagross here, goes up against Empoleon, they're probably going to want to switch out or they're going to have a really bad time. What move do you want to use on your Empoleon? Probably Waterfall with Hydro Pump, but if you are being mindful of the dragons, you could go with Metal Claw and Blizzard, because ultimately, mindful Metagross would probably want to switch out of this guy, right? Big problem that it has is that it's weak to Raikou, and it's weak to Machamp, and it doesn't really threaten Mewtwo a whole lot, so yeah, Empoleon kind of has a rough deal in that respect. So your choice if you want to include it on a gym or not. If you roll up to a gym, you have a powered up Empoleon, you see that the gym is got this glaring Metagross weakness. Well, throwing this guy in might just be enough to make a Metagross attacker or a team of 6 Metagross user go, that's got an Empoleon, I'm gonna go fight a different gym. Maybe it won't do anything at all. Hard to say. It's gym defense, Pokemon Go, right? Next we got the fairy type Pokemon. We got Togekiss and we got Gardevoir here. Both are really excellent at harassing Machamp, and they're both really excellent at harassing Dragon type Pokemon. So they got the double resistance to Machamp, they got the double resistance to Dragon because Fairy double resists Dragon. So really good defenders for those reasons. Sort of like how Empoleon here is weak to Raikou and Machamp. These guys are technically weak to Raikou and Metagross. Fairy is weak to Steel, so brings them down really quickly. Raikou has effectiveness on Togekiss, brings it down. And Gardevoir has a really hard time tolerating neutral damage. So Raikou hitting Gardevoir is sort of like the same level of it hitting a Pokemon for super effective damage, which brings it down pretty quick, which also means that stuff that is super effective against Gardevoir, like a Ghost attack from Mewtwo, bring it down even quicker. So yeah, Gardevoir has some issues. Togekiss has some issues. If Metagross didn't exist, I would say that these two would rate a little bit better, but Metagross does exist, and that definitely hurts them. And I guess if you're thinking about the future, where you've got the multi-charge moves going on, Machamp does have Heavy Slam, and that's something that could also work against these two as well. I don't know if you'd want to be using Heavy Slam on them instead of switching out for like a Metagross or something. I guess that comes down to personal preference, but that is another nail in the coffin of nails in the coffin against these specific Fairy-type Pokemon. But for the reasons stated, against Machamp, against Dragons, excellent defenders, so you might want to consider them for those reasons. Then we got two Ground-type Pokemon. We got Claydol and Donphan. Claydol is a little bit of an odd choice, but it does have a really good low CP range performance, which makes it pretty considerable for gym defense. These two guys are Ground-type Pokemon, so Raikou doesn't want to mess with them. Claydol has the Psychic typing, so Machamp doesn't want to mess with it. Overall, Claydol goes down pretty quick to neutral attacks from like a Dragon Pokemon or maybe Metagross. So it does have issues there. Donphan has Play Rough, so Play Rough can be pretty punishing to a Machamp that's hitting it for neutral damage, and it can also hurt the Dragon types. Ground type Pokemon, so it might make Metagross users a little cautious to fight it. So it does have a lot going for it, but overall it's a little bit too bland, I guess, to really stand out in a big sense. Like, I'd never say that Donphan's an elite defender. I wouldn't say that Donphan is a practical defender, but if you do want to defend against Raikou and you don't like Claydol, you're just like, Steelix, he's weak to Machamp. I don't want to use Steelix, but I do want to defend well against Raikou. Then Donphan, really good defender against the Raikou. And then finally, we have Charizard. And Charizard is basically like Gyarados in a lot of ways. It resists Metagross, and it resists Machamp. And it can hit them back with super effective damage. You got the Blast Burn, taking down the Metagross. You got the Air Slash or the Wing Attack, hurting the Machamp. So really good for these reasons. But it's just not that good against neutral damage. It's weak to Raikou. I think the time difference between a Raikou bringing down a Gyarados and a Charizard is like 2 or 3 seconds, right? So it might not be double weak to electric, but it is certainly weak to electric. So it's not that potent. And overall, I think it just kind of being arguably a weaker Gyarados was enough to bring it down from being a practical gym defender to being more of an anti-meta one. Gyarados is good enough where it's like, you'd probably want to use Gyarados, where Charizard isn't quite there yet. But definitely worth considering, and if you got the shiny Charizard, it's a black Charizard, and if you want to show it off and be optimal at gym defense, well, now you can do that. So these are overall what we have deemed to be the best gym defenders. Of course, there are gym defenders that are good, that didn't make the list, some honorable mentions. So I'm going to go over that with you guys. Defenders that almost made it might be good for reasons that you feel are good. You might want to use them instead of these guys. Maybe you like to be a little quirky. So we got Azumarill, Tentacruel, Alola Marowak, both Mucks, Lantern, Wobbuffet, Vaporeon, and Umbreon. So yeah, these guys really good. They almost made it, but they weren't quite good enough to actually make it for one reason or another. Tentacruel has the same kind of swag that the Gyarados and the Slow Dudes do, where they resist both Metagross and Machamp because Poison type resists fighting and water, but the damage output from it just wasn't good enough to really make it that potent of a force. So if you're really just like weighing the scales here and certain Pokemon make it, certain Pokemon don't, Tentacruel didn't make it for that reason. As far as the Mucks go, they are quite good for various reasons. I mean, normal Muck resists Machamp, so that's enough to make any Pokemon good on defense, am I right? And then the other Muck has the Dark typing, which gives it dark resistances, resistance to Dark, resistance to Ghost. Not a lot of Pokemon other than normal types have resistance to Ghost, and basically nothing has resistance to Dark other than Dark Pokemon themselves and Fairies. Yeah, Fairies. Kind of hard to find that in a defender because Dark-type Pokemon are also weak to Machamp, but because of the Poison typing, Alola Muck isn't, which makes it definitely worthwhile as a gym defender. You got Lantern, and Lantern's a great time waster, especially with like a low CP range, so it can last over time, much like Chauncey can. And Lantern's big claim to fame is that it's kind of like an anti-meta Pokemon in that it really wastes Metagross's time. Electric type resists Steel type damage, Water type resists Steel type damage, so doubles up. Metagross doesn't want to deal with a Lantern. Other Pokemon, though, just kind of roll it over pretty quickly, so sorry, Lantern. Azumarill is from the past. You know that's always been a good kind of niche defender because it can defend against Machamp and Dragons, and it's got the low CP range. But now, Metagross is kind of a ball buster. Neutral damage to Azumarill, so Azumarill's still kind of hanging in there, but it doesn't really have anything to threaten Metagross with. And then Raikou just rolls it on over, so yeah, sorry Azumarill. Wobbuffet, similar issues as Chauncey, where it's just not that threatening, but it's like Chauncey still has like a little bit of spunk to it, where Wobbuffet has like no spunk to it. So good defender over time, low CP range, can throw people off. Well, not really throw people off, but make them waste their time. But I don't think it's good enough where it makes people want to pass up the gym. So I might be underrating it for that reason. If you are in favor of the Wobbuffet, definitely rope it on in there if you feel like it's worthwhile. Vaporeon is just too bland. You got the water type Pokemon. It's not as good as all the other water type Pokemon on the list. It just isn't. But if you really like Vaporeon, or you got like a maxed out Vaporeon you like to throw in gyms, it's still a pretty worthwhile gym defender. It's not like bad. It's just like not as good as the other ones. Umbreon's excellent, wastes time, and it wastes time pretty well even against a Machamp, but it's weak to Machamp, so that hurts it quite a bit. And it doesn't really hurt that much either, so it's got like similar issues to like Chauncey and Wobbuffet in them. And then at the end of the day, I was thinking about putting it into the good but LOL Machamp tier, but I just felt like it just wasn't pulling enough weight to make it. So if you're an Umbreon enthusiast, it is a good time waster, it is a good gym defender. I just don't feel like it's quite good enough to make the tier list. Alola Marowak, quite good, you know, resists Machamp, resists Metagross, can hurt them over time, especially if they're not paying attention, but overall just not that potent of a force. So if you like gym defense over time and you like wasting Stardust, then maybe invest in an Alolan Marowak. If you're not into all that, especially the wasting Stardust part, you could probably pass up Alolan Marowak, not really miss out on anything. So that was a clip from my live stream SwagTips. SwagTips streams every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Central Time on the Twitch channel SwagTips. If you like this content and you want to see more like it, well then subscribe to SwagTips. If you got any questions on this content, or maybe you just want to tell me that Gyarados is a bad defender or something, comment below and I'll probably read it. SwagTips. I'd also like to give a special shout out to these patron supporters. If you're unaware, SwagTips does have a Patreon to help me afford a video editor while I'm in school. If you'd like to support the Swag Man, then check out my Patreon, link in the description.